We formed a quorum and it's also the appointed time I call the meeting to order. We have scheduled for our meeting today. If necessary, I can extend it by 15 minutes. We dealt with 4 items on the 13th and the 16th of July, and we have 19 outstanding items to deal with. Now, if members have a direct or indirect pecuniary interest in any of the items on the agenda today, please declare the nature of interest under ROP 83A before you speak on the item. And I draw members' attention to the arrangements for voting on an item where you have a pecuniary interest, that is ROP 84. Paper FCR 2018-1942. This paper invites members to pass a recommendation by the Establishment Subcommittee made at its meeting on the 20th of June 2018. This is the creation of a supernumerary post of a Chief Systems Manager at D1 and the retention of a supernumerary post of AO staff grade at D2 in the Commerce, Industry and Tourism branch of the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau to take forward the development of a trade single window in Hong Kong. The ESE spent 1 hour 14 minutes on this item, and the administration has also provided a supplementary information paper, and the Bureau has a team here to answer members' questions. I open the floor to members for questions. Mr. Ray Chen. Thank you for taking forward trade single window in Hong Kong, and the purpose is that the industry can have a one-stop service. In such matters, this can save time and cost. Now, under 6A, when fully implemented, the TSW will cover 50 types of import and export trade documents under the purview of more than 10 government agencies, with the CNED being the future TSW operator and main frontline law enforcement agency, and that the Bureau is now preparing a draft bill for presentation to the Council within this session. Now, for the creation and retention of the 2 posts respectively, will they be responsible for coordinating with government or departments? As regards the legislative proposal, can you give us a summary? And in the ESC meeting, we asked a question. I think it was by Mr. Charles Mock. EU's Common Data Protection Act, would it affect the collection and transfer of personal data under TSW? The chairman of ESC asked the administration to provide a paper, but after reading the administration's paper, I felt that the question was not answered. In the first paragraph, it said that inevitably personal data will have to be collected, and in taking forward TSW, it will maintain close liaison with relevant authorities, and that is the DFJ and also the Privacy Commissioner's Office, to study the impact of the TSW. Now, the act, the legislation was passed 2 years ago, and you have passed the buck to the Privacy Commissioner. Has he studied the possible risks involved in the new initiative? First, the Protection of Common Data Act. TSW will provide a one-stop electronic platform for production of documents. Inevitably, some personal data will be collected. In taking forward TSW, we will strictly adhere to our personal data protection ordinance, and also code by the commissioner. And then the legislation referred to took effect on the 21st of May 2018. Subsequent to the last meeting, we've discussed with relevant colleagues, including DOJ and the Privacy Commissioner's Office, to reflect members concerned. As said by Mr. Chen, in promoting the TSW, we will consider how EU's legislation is going to affect us. So we are already doing the relevant work. As regards the legislative timetable, on the amendment of the legislation, under the TSW, there are three main areas to design the work processes, to develop the computer system, and legislative amendment. Now we will have to review relevant legislation for amendments. Now take the import and export ordinance as an example. We will have more than 80 amendments. We will not underestimate the challenges associated. What about the legislative timetable? Are you drafting the provisions already? We plan to discuss with the industry and the department. We expect to present the principal bill to the Council in 2019, and there will be close to 40 related ordinances that have to be amended. Okay, thank you. Mr. Yu Shiwing. Thank you. The administration has got a timetable for rolling out the TSW. Now it is on a voluntary basis, and as the administration said, in 2019 there will be a bill presented to the Council, and in 2020 it will be implemented on a mandatory basis. I don't know what is your timetable arrangement with the industry, including training and dissemination of information. Do you have any time frame established with the industry so that the industry can support you and you can carry out your plan smoothly? Regarding the legislative exercise and TSW, and is there any need for interface with overseas relevant authorities? If yes, what you doing right now? Regarding trade engagement and communication, well, we have set up 6 user consultation groups with stakeholders. Those are air cargo terminal operators, sea cargo terminal operators, and public cargo working areas operators, airlines, shipping lines, express couriers, and forwarders and traders. The CNED is the operator of the TSW. We'll set up a 24-hour hotline and counters, and also contact points with counterpart authorities overseas. And also a communication with other economies. First, we believe TSW is able to connect with other economies, and we will keep track of the latest trends in the facilitation of trade, and will also continue to review the implications of TSW, and then when necessary we will upgrade the function of TSW to ensure that we can achieve these objectives. Chairman, so the Undersecretary has already started engaging the trade. Will there be a further public consultation, and in the voluntary period, is there any training, and is there any timetable for improving the system to make the implementation more smooth? And you talked about communication with overseas counterparts. Will the system be rolled out simultaneously, or are we ahead of them? Thank you. Regarding communication and communication with the trade, we have got 13 mock documents, and the industry has been invited to try it out. We attach a lot of significance to their feedback, and that would help us to improve phase 1 implementation, and the feedback is useful for phases 2 and 3. We're grateful to the trade for their participation. As regards the progress of TSW in other economies, different economies have different I&E systems and system to facilitate trade. So I don't think we can compare with them when it comes to the implementation of TSW. But Hong Kong is a free trade, and we've always been very efficient in our customs clearance. The TSW will help us to scale new heights, and we will liaise with the trade as far as possible. Well, with trade partners, with our leading trade partners, will you promote the adoption of TSW to help the trade? Yes. Take the Maine as an example. It is our greatest trading partner. We have started some interface work with them. Last year, with Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Guangdong authorities, we have draw references from their system and to learn from the experience, hoping that we can have better interface with these places. Mr. Eddie Ju, Paragraph 5 says that the administration once proposed that the post-shipment TDEC to be submitted at the pre-shipment stage. But because of objection from the trader, you have maintained the current arrangement, that is to be submitted within 14 days after impact or import or export. But you also encourage traders to submit such documents at the pre-shipment stage voluntarily. In 2016, when you conducted the consultation on TSW, you said that is a global mainstream practice and also the best practice for TDEC to be submitted at the pre-shipment stage, so that the CNED can assess the risks and then be more targeted in enforcement. Now, at the request of the industry, you have backpedaled. So, do you have any plan to implement your original target after some time, so that the documents can be submitted at the pre-shipment stage for better enforcement? We are going to do that at phase 3. In fact, under ROCAS, that is the road information system, there is already a blueprint for the industry to follow, and then it's already in the relevant documents. So we'll continue to encourage pre-shipment TDEC. At the first stage, it will be mandatory. So at the third stage, it's going to be mandatory. Thank you. Undersecretary, what is the penalty for submission of document late? I think the fine is just a few $100s, right? Is it serving sufficient deterrent, and how many cases have you penalized in the past? Under the I&E customs declaration system, we have an established system. We are ahead of many economies in terms of ranking in competitiveness. So we will continue to use this established system. But my question has not been answered. So you're saying that the fine should not be too high, it's just a few $100s. And what about the number of cases involved? Regarding Mr. Ju's system. As question, yes, we impose a fine if the submission is later, but we have to take into account the operational needs of the industry. The industry has done a quite good job in terms of compliance. We are the 8th largest economy in the world, but in a reduction in the receipt of trade documents and information, the situation has been satisfactory. Of course, some traders are late in submission of such documents. We remind them to do that, but if there are black sheep, we have a penalty system. We'll continue to do this. Under TSW, we are going to unify different systems so that submission can be done on a single platform, and we will continue to encourage the trade to do that. All right, can you tell us whether in the past few years anyone has been punished? Do you have such figures? The Customs and Excise, in the submission of documents, there have always been enforcement cases. I don't have the figures with me, but I think members have raised their concerns on various occasions, and we have already provided such statistics. So please give us the statistics later. Please do so after the meeting. Mr. Gary Fan, 5 minutes. The TSW IT platform have far-reaching implications for the trade and the logistics industry. In 2016, there was a public consultation on the principles, on the direction, and there was no information on the actual legislative amendments. In pages 6 and 7, we understand that there will be 3 phases, and in the T&I panel, we were briefed. In 2022, there will be the second phase requiring more documents. In phase 3, the pre-shipment documentation regime will be introduced. All 3 stages involve legislative amendments, and the system is also mandatory. Will the administration carry out full public consultation when it comes to the implementation of the last 2 phases? If not, the reasons for that? Yes, on the workflows and also the amendments, we have consulted the industry. We will consult the air cargo terminal operators, sea cargo terminal operators, and PCW operators, and so forth. We are going to consult them extensively. You do the same for the second 2 phases in 2022 and 2023.
The previous consultation on TSW, we had consulted the public and industry. This is a large project, and we need to do it step by step. We set the direction, and the industry accepted it, and at different stages we need to implement the measures. So in phase 2, phase 3, it involves legislative amendment. If we require a mandatory regime where they submit trade documents, we need to amend the law. So as with other legislative amendment work, we need to consult the industry and we need to coordinate the efforts. We will come back to LegCo, Commerce Industry Panel, to consult legislators' opinion. So we will continue these efforts. Mr. Aulakim, this morning we had to ask questions about wholesale and retail. I want to ask about online shopping. It's related to TSW because there are some areas where you need to declare with customs. So when you purchase online, it might be for your self-use, and some companies might have to declare customs through the TSW. So if you look at the customs declaration regime, it is not user-friendly because they have to submit the electronic documents through 3 companies. So Trade Easy and the Easy Trade, and these websites links are on the customs website. So people say it is very inconvenient. Let's say I'm ordering a pot and they realize they need to submit a form for Hong Kong Customs, and some people might not be familiar with the legal requirements. So since you are implementing a TSW, will you consider simplifying the online purchases or people engaged in trade? Could you make it simple for the general public to declare with customs? Well, as I said just now, in our design workflow, we will consider what can be improved. Just now, you talked about GES, the government electronic trade. We will look into that. As Mr. Au said, if you wish to import, export, and declare customs, you have to go through the 3 GETS suppliers. So when we have the single trade window, the individual purchases or traders, they can use the TSW to declare customs. So they don't have to work through the 3 service providers. And of course, the individuals, they might not wish to use an electronic declaration, so can service providers provide the service? So when we proceed with the next phase, we will consider that. So the simple response to Mr. Au is that in the future, they can declare customs online or even through the mobile phone. Well, I just heard a new piece of information. I thought the 3 companies, you would have to continue to use them through the TSW. But then, with the TSW, you don't need to use the 3 service providers. That is correct. I'm surprised with the answer. The 3 companies, if the contract ran until 2024, but the TSW starts in 2023. So can I say that you will be putting them out of business for 1 year, and if people wish to use the old mechanism, they can continue? But by 2023, you don't need to use the 3 companies. You will be using the new platform for people. And of course, I hope that you can have a simplified regime. So the example I gave, it's about online shopping. The customer is notified by customs that they need to make a declaration. So the new mechanism, whether for people who are preparing to declare or they have a process, you can make it easy. The manufacturers are also concerned that will the EID make it easier for the general public to declare customs? Chairman, I'd like to respond to the GETS service provider. In our public consultation, we had made it clear that the GETS would be replaced by the TSW. So when we renewed the contract, it would expire by 2024. We had considered that the implementation of TSW would be in 2023, and the industry needed some time to transition. Well, my colleague will answer the question about EID. Well, our project management office has been in touch with the government officials, and we will be using EID when it's ready. When we implement phase 3, we will use EID for customs declaration. So we only have one person in the queue. I'll invite other members to return for voting. Mr. Ma Fong-Gok, I support the TSW customs declaration, and I think it's reasonable to add the post of secretary. And then you say you need to add 8 more posts. They are posts for 5 years with a period of 5 years. They are these supernumerary posts, and the increase of expenditure is 46%. So I don't quite understand why they need this support, because with the digitization, once the system is set up, you should be able to run smoothly. So why does it need 5 years? Could you explain? In the last 2 years, our colleagues have been working very hard to build a blueprint, a framework for TSW. So a large amount of IT work is needed now for developing the information system, the different IT systems, and the subsidiary items. There's testing, maintenance, and I'll give you an example. So the user requirements will have to be converted into tender requirements, and I understand. But put simply, the TSW, when will it be implemented? When can it come into operation? Do you have an exact date? Well, my colleague can answer. Well, these new posts have a time period of 5 years. It is in alignment with our implementation date of TSW. When, as Mr. Ma is correct, when our scheme is implemented, we won't need so many staff. So in 5 years' time, as the TSW is implemented, we can slowly phase out these jobs. But in the coming few years, there's a lot of work aside from IT development, our consultation with the industry, the freight industry, the logistics industry. We need to follow up on the matters they raise. We need to come up with solutions. We also need to negotiate with the government internally. We have different certificates for import-export. We need to use the TSW to comply with the law. We also have to help the traders submit their information. So that's why when we add these 8 or 9 posts, it's necessary, but it's not a long-term arrangement. Well, has the government considered that after implementing TSW, some of the workload can be relieved? Have you assessed the savings, the potential savings? Would it be possible to reduce manpower in commerce industry? Well, within the industry and the government, the administrative costs assessment, when we finish the phase 2, phase 3 design, we will conduct an assessment and report back. Mr. Ao Kim, I want to follow up on customs declaration. Do you have any overseas examples where they declare customs for 14 days after customs clearing. They've already exported, and then they can declare 14 days after the goods have been exported. So we heard here that North Korea likes to use Hong Kong. Is it because of these loopholes? Do we have any overseas examples of this 14-day arrangement? Thank you, Mr. Au. Regarding other jurisdictions, different jurisdictions have different arrangements. They might have export tax or import tax. They need to levy a tax. So before the goods are imported, exported, they require customs declaration. But Hong Kong is a free port. We have a simplified arrangement. So we only require the customs declaration 14 days after the goods are exported to serve as a record for statistics or customs information. But does that mean that in this period that it's a vacuum? No. The customs has different channels to collect information, and there will be risk assessment based on this intelligence. And given our large volume of exports, if we don't use a risk, the assessment, it would not be feasible. So customs is doing a lot of work in this area. Well, we don't want our regime to be abused. There has been a container vessel that had been seized in South Korea because it was smuggling oil on its way to North Korea. So there is a potential a loophole. I had wanted to follow up on Mr. Tan Ji-chun's question about generic information. Well, the supplement document says that you will maintain liaison with the different government officials and follow up on the legal impact. So the legislation was endorsed in 2016. You had 2 years to prepare. So aside from study, you don't know what the impact is. Well, as I answered, in implementing the TSW, we will conduct privacy studies to protect privacy. On the 25th of May 2018, the EU regulation came into effect, and we had initiated our concern and follow-up. Would you consult the EU Commissioner for Protection of Data to see how you can align your efforts? Well, regarding the TSW, this is cargo information because it is related to imports and exports. Of course, we do have personal data. We attach importance to privacy, so we do have contact with the Privacy Commissioner and the DOJ, so we maintain our communication with them, and we will assess what impact it will have on Hong Kong. Thank you for. We will submit the question to DOJ and Privacy Commissioner. So we also have a ex gratia allowance item. The third runway system is also a matter of concern. So we still have 9 post-creation applications, and we have 7.5 hours. Please press the button. I have asked members to return. So, Mr. Tan Ji-chun, I'd like to ask about the timetable. We're now in phase 1. In phase 2, we have to amend the law, and the paper says that the earliest would be 2022, so they might not be accomplished by 2022. So does that mean it can be implemented as soon as the law is amended, or do we still have some other work? And phase 3 is scheduled for 2023. So I want to know, the Hong Kong TSW, how do we compare with our neighbors? Are we falling behind? For example, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea. Because I see, using mainland as an example, TSW is implemented on 26 provinces in the mainland, and they will also implement a nationwide TSW. So the Hong Kong stakeholders are concerned that cross-border logistics will lose our competitiveness. Well, put simply, our efficiency regarding logistics and our competitiveness is very good. As the Secretary said just now, different jurisdictions, when they implement TSW, they have different considerations. If you look at Hong Kong, if they want to use TSW to make it business friendly or make customs more efficient, Hong Kong is already doing a very good job, and of course we seek to do better. So in the trade arrangement with other jurisdictions, we wish to be more efficient. Now, regarding the timetable question, in phase 1 it will be implemented this year. Phase 2, phase 3, as Mr. Chan said, it will have to go through legislative amendment process. As I said, we will submit the legislative amendment by 2019. Then we have subsidiary legislation, the import-export ordinance. It has some 80 plus items that need amendment. We will do it as soon as possible. Well, phase 2 and 3 are a year apart, so the grace period of a year, will it extend to 2023? Well, phase 2 and phase 3, they cover different trade documents. Phase 2 is for individually restricted items. For example, restricted products, before they are imported, they might have to make an application with the relevant authorities, and the papers involved in phase 3 are all goods. The customs form or cargo manifest, and phase 3 and phase 2 are 2 separate areas. That's why we do phase 2 first and implement phase 3. Well, if the law is implemented, does that mean all goods have to comply? Our inclination, Chairman, is in phase 2 to see whether it can be brought ahead. If we need to make legislative amendment, of course we will make it mandatory, but is there room for the IT system and allow the industry to get accustomed? We'll have to see on how the situation develops. Mr. Ong Kim.
Chairman, if I may sum up, I hope the government will not think that if things are working well, there isn't a problem. Otherwise, if you have, for example, a tanker flying the Hong Kong flag going to North Korea, and that would breach the UN sanctions against North Korea. So you have to ensure that there is no loophole in your system. So I have 2 suggestions to follow up on the earlier questions. First of all, the arrangement for the submission of export declaration within 14 days. Now, do you have any figures in relation to foreign businessmen who default? So I really am skeptical. So for trader, after people have I think there might be some illegal activities involved. And this is something I think you need to think about. And secondly, regarding the the protection of general data regulation, I don't think you should say that most of the declaration involve cargoes, but so long as personal data is involved, and the regulation and the ordinance regulates just the cargoes. But I don't think you should ignore that regulation. I think the biggest difference between that regulation and the privacy ordinance is that you have the right to delete personal data and so on. And all these are not provided for under our privacy ordinance. So I think it would be best for the DOJ to look into this, or you can consult with the European Union. I think we need to think about this carefully, even after we've enacted the TSW ordinance. Even if there's a single piece of personal data, we would attach a lot of importance to the protection of personal data. We have been liaising with the DOJ all along, and we will continue to follow up on the EU regulation. So I think the member can rest assured that we will come up with suitable arrangements. Secondly, as to whether or not people would use Hong Kong for illegal trade activities and whether there are loopholes in the law, I can assure the member that our trade declaration system has been operating very well, and of course with the help of the TFW we can do better. It can facilitate business for the import exporters and also for the government departments to enforce the law. If there are no further questions, I will now put FC 2018-19 42 to the vote. The division bell will now ring for 5 minutes. Remind members that we will be voting on paper 42, which is the proposal to create a the position for the creation of the setting up of the TSW system. So voting begins. The voting is now. I'm sorry. I think voting is closed. We have 35 in favor, no objection. I declare that the paper is now approved. We'll now move on to paper 2018-19-48. Members are invited to approve the special ex gratia cash allowance for the clearance, those affected by clearance objects. The Development Bureau consulted the development panel on the 23rd and the 29th of May. To answer members' questions, we have Ms. Benedict Lin and her team to answer members' questions. I would like to first of all invite Mr. Tommy Jeong to report to members about the discussion of the development panel. Or at the meeting on the 29th of May, the Development Bureau panel discussed the government's proposal in respect of the ex gratia cash allowance, and also at the meeting on May the 23rd, the government also discussed the government's proposal regarding the special ex gratia cash allowance for those affected by the clearance projects. And the panel on the 29th of May endorsed 4 resolutions appealing to the government to implement different projects, including those residents who have been forcibly evicted off, even though they have been included in the freezing exercise, to be still eligible for compensation, and to arrange for those affected clearance to be offered housing in interim housing units. Ms. Alice Mack. Chairman, regarding the compensation arrangement, especially the one-off voluntary registration, for the whole arrangement, would it only apply to the squatter huts in the new development areas? What happens if you have similar squatter areas in the urban areas and also in other parts of the new territories which is not in the NDA? Will they also be eligible to the arrangement? And also those who have already been covered by the one-off registration exercise. Chairman, the standardized arrangement will apply to all those people affected by government clearance programs, because if we need to carry out such projects and develop the land, then it would be covered. The one-off registration exercise, I think if our funding application were approved, the Lands Department will trigger the voluntary registration scheme, and this would apply to all those who were registered back in all the non-residential squatter structures which have been registered in 1982. We hope that the government will inform all the squatter dwellers regarding this arrangement, because the Housing Panel and the Development Bureau had held a joint meeting to listen to public views, and we found that some villagers and the inhabitants of squatter structures did not really understand too well the compensation arrangements and how the arrangement will affect them. For example, that the eligible squatters can be relocated to dedicated villages, and some residents. I think in the hearing the submission. We have submission saying that the household may own properties. As a result, the members of the household will not be eligible to the ex-gratia allowance. But when they first moved into the unit, they were a small family. But after they've lived in the squatter hut unit for some time, it will develop into several nuclear families, and therefore some of the members are not eligible. So, is there a mechanism for the person who owns properties to be removed from the household, list, so that it will not affect the eligibility of the other household members for and the entitlement to the compensation? And for those who, I think at the public hearing we heard that for those who live in squatter huts, they may own their own animals. If they will offer compensation and they offer, rehousing in a peerage estate, they are not allowed to own pets. At the last hearing, we asked the Transport and Housing Bureau, and we were told that these special estates will be used to actually, accept these affected squatter dwellers, and these people are used to owning pets. So will the Housing Authority and the Housing Department allow these people to own pets, so that for the stray pets which will be affected because of the clearance program will be taken care of? I hope the PS will continue to reflect this point to the TH Bureau for us. When we announced the scheme in the middle of May, we have actually gone to areas which will soon be subject to clearance, including Kutong North, Fanning North, and Hong Shui Kiu, to talk to the residents. And this exercise will continue. Another thing we have to do is about the voluntary registration scheme, and this would apply to those people, those squatter units which were registered as non-domestic, structures. But this time we have make a realization to recognize the non-domestic structures as well. So when we trigger the voluntary registration scheme, the Lands Department will need to conduct sufficient publicity as to how we enforce the regulation that the person who apply for compensation should not own any properties. Now, the applicant will have to state in the application form who are their family members. And at the panel, I already said that if a family has mature children, they can actually ask for the household to be split into separate households, and therefore the entitlement will not be affected. Regarding the dedicated housing estates to accommodate these residents, we will certainly talk to the housing department, but the environment in the public housing estate may not be the same as the squatter huts, and therefore we may need to study that carefully. So this is, we expect that it will take a long time for us to discuss this item. So I'm going to exercise very strict time management in order that more members will be able to ask questions. Mr. Edigi, 5 minutes. Thank you. I will not only be speaking once on this item, so for my first round, I'd like to first of all, express my overall opinion. Now, regarding the improved, compensation regime for squatter, inhabitants, it will address the concern of residents so that you can, remove the red tape and the development can proceed more efficiently. Now, the question is not only about the compensation arrangement, whether it's a good or bad arrangement, but rather for the whole town planning system is not democratic or fair. You're favoring people with influence, be they the owners of golf, courses, the indigenous residents and the property developers, at the expense of the non-indigenous residents. The government will have to resolve this problem. The people of Hong Kong cannot participate in the urban planning decisions. All members of the town planning board are appointed by the government. These are deep-rooted problems that we need to address. And coming back to the new proposal for compensation, like Ms. Alice Mack said, it's very complicated. Since May the 10th, the villagers still don't understand what you're doing, and we only have a few villagers coming to the public area today. But you're talking about change which will affect several 100,000 people, and you only allow such a short time for us to discuss this before you approve it, and this is not satisfactory. There are two major aspects of the proposed changes. First of all, you're standardizing the entire compensation arrangement. In the past, people will get more compensation if they live in an NDA. For Guangzhou, if the government want to build a public housing estate or build a public toilet, the residents will get a smaller compensation. And I think standardizing the compensation package is the right thing to do. And secondly, you now added new arrangement where people don't need to go through a means test to be offered housing society units, and also an amended cash allowance arrangement. Now, after I've consulted many of the villagers, I would still object to this proposal because of the following reasons. First of all, the affected residents don't understand why the government is forcing them to move into resident units built by the housing society, where the rents are more expensive than those charged by the housing authority. But your policy now is such that you are making the residents feel that right now they don't have to pay any rents, but in future they have to pay the rents charged by the housing society. So they don't know why the government is insisting that for these special units to accommodate these affected clearers will have to be housing society flats.
Second is the EGA. Now, if you want, you can have cash or have it in kind. Now, the kind is better. There can be rehousing, dedicated rehousing estates. However, for the cash, it's not going to be adjusted according to inflation. Take North East Centre example. The proposal $0.6 million that was set at 2009 levels, given that housing prices have more than doubled. And still, you use the calculation adopted in 2009, and therefore, the EGA is now no longer attractive. You can work out the cost of HA or HS unit, and now if the cash EGA is not attractive, everyone will opt for rehousing. And then there are a few defects in your scheme, therefore I cannot support it. First, there is no option for reprovisioning of a village, and second, there is nothing in it to look after the welfare of animals. Third, there is nothing to reform the the agriculture compensation. So these are three defects have made the proposals defective, and many residents affected by clearance are not properly protected, not to mention the animals. I will pause at this moment. You have not reserved time for the administration to respond, but the questions are very critical, and I hope after the administration has responded, members will not ask similar questions. Thank you. First, the question of rent. Because we're talking about housing rearrangement without any means test, and therefore we have provided housing society. Still, the rent is about half of the market rent, or less than half of the market value. if individual households find the rent too expensive, then they can also opt for public housing by means of a means test. And for the housing society has said that for households that have opted rehousing at dedicated rehousing estates, if for some reasons they suddenly cannot afford the rent, they have established assistance scheme. As for cash EGA, Mr. G said that we have not taken into account inflation. Now we have proposed to raise the EGAs. They were never pegged with inflation. Rather, it's by the rating and valuation department, which will evaluate the value of similar buildings or tenement buildings in the vicinity. So we make adjustments twice every year, so that the arrangement will ensure that clearees can rent village houses or tenement buildings in the vicinity. Now, the member mentioned the special EGA for Hong Shui Kiu and Northeast NT. It has always been $0.6 million. It was a special arrangement for the two developments, and it was never pegged to inflation or the mechanism I just mentioned. Some people asked how come we have not raised that special EGA at the same time. This is because we have now over rehousing without any means test. So the NTAs have now an additional choice. This 0.6 million, or the effect of the 0.6 million special EGA, has now a lesser effect. In fact, 0.6 million is rather lenient. Now, if the squatter is bigger in size, regarding the approved EGA, the maximum floor area can be up to 100 square meters. So the maximum amount of EGA can be $1.2 million. So or subject to your own choice, you may enjoy better compensation. And Mr. G said that we have not offered an option for village reprovisioning. After all, we are talking about squatter households. Now, this may not sound pleasant to the ears of many, but squatters are tolerated structures without any title. They have been tolerated and pending removal or demolition when there is development. We didn't used to give any compensation, and that's why we do not offer any option for a village reprovisioning. The member also talked about treatment for animals. In fact, when we have a clearance exercise for development, some animals will be affected. Now, if members have opted or clearers have opted for HA rehousing, dogs are always not allowed. But for cats and also smaller pets, there is a list allowed. And as for dogs, I think we're talking about the number, because some NDAs are rather big. And AFCD has worked very closely with us in setting up hotlines so the affected clearees can notify the department first to enhance its cooperation with NGOs to receive such dogs and arrange for adoption. If resources are required, I believe the administration will seek extra resources appropriately in our budget or estimates. Mr. Holden Chow. As explained, the purpose is to enhance protection for squatter households. My question relates to para 12, 12B. implementation arrangements. B says that for households registered in PCS but subsequently evicted from surveyed or licensed structures by lot owners before government's actual clearance, will introduce a discretionary mechanism allowing them to apply to the Director of Lands for ex gratia C and R arrangements on compassionate grounds. According to 12B, those who claimed to be owners have evicted these households. Now, first we have you have to establish that indeed they have been evicted and they have not received any other form of compensation. So, I'd like to know the EGA to them under your discretionary mechanism. How is it different from the EGA under ordinary circumstances? And what do you mean by not having received other forms of compensation or rehousing as a result of the eviction? Does that mean that they have to prove that they have not received any forms of compensation or rehousing? And what will be the retrospective period? If a household has submitted reasons to satisfy the government that they've been evicted for reasons acceptable, then the compensation or rehousing, or rather the EGA payable will be the same as other people, but we will also consider whether he has lived 7 years dated back from the date of the recent survey to ensure that he is eligible for rehousing for non-means tested PRH, and also for 2 years he will then be eligible to subsidized housing without having to go through any means test. Now, if the household claims that he was evicted, we'll have to check whether the owner has given him any compensation. We call it compassionate ground. We don't want to lay down too many criteria. It will be up to the household to explain to us. So what if there's been some private settlement between the household and the compensation? So you do not draw a line so long as he can submit evidence to satisfy you that he has not received a similar compensation. Yes, our concept is to be as simple as possible. We allow the household to state his case, but that doesn't mean that he will always be accepted. So long as you are satisfied, then the compensation he gets will be no different from what his counterparts get. Right? I just want to confirm this. Mr. Ray Chen. Of course, we want to ask a lot of questions. We don't want to waste time debating with the administration. But having heard what the PS said, I cannot help debating with her on the following grounds. Now, this is in fact compensation. Of course, the government refrains from using this term. Now, according to the administration, it's illegal occupation. They are tolerated, and where the government has use for the land, they can be evicted without any compensation. I think you heard people who have lived in squatters for a long time. You always talked about being people-oriented. Now, you don't call this compensation, you call it EGA. But I hope you will not adopt the same argument to squatter households. I think many members may not fully grasp what the proposals are about. Now, we are not talking about a certain amount of money to be injected into the Capital Works Reserve Fund for EGA. Rather, we are asked to support a few proposals. EGA EGA for demolition of squatters, domestic removal allowance, and also EGA for business undertakings operators. This is what I get from the paper. I'd like to know what is the difference between our approving and not approving the paper. When the May 10th proposals were published, we held public hearings, and we received cases from the complaints division, and we also visited the relevant sites. All right, if we do not approve this paper, what will be the scenario? That is, it will be the original package without the enhancements. And I'd like to know when you are going to use the money. And under what circumstances will you have to seek FC's approval again? For instance, non-means tested rehousing arrangements to housing society flats, you do not require approval, right? What we are required to give approval is the EGAs and also domestic removal allowance. So under what scenarios will you have to come back and seek our approval? A change in the amount, a change in the terms, or a change in the amount of the EGA, or change in the eligibility criteria of the EGA. Now, according to the paper, Kutong North, Fanning North, and Hong Shui Kiu EGAs. Now, for these three developments, how much public funds is involved? All right, I allow an extra 3 minutes. First, I have no intention to upset existing squatter households. The package here seeks to offer better assistance, if not for the intention to take better care of the needs, we would not have proposed these enhancements. As for what members are requested to approve, yes, we are now proposing EGAs as well as rehousing. But Mr. Chen is correct in saying that for rehousing, land grant and also housing arrangements are involved. No FC's approval is needed. But why do we need FC's approval in the enhanced EGAs? Because for clearance affected EGAs, now what are the beneficiaries, and how the calculation of the EGAs were approved by FC in the past. So in changing the scope of beneficiaries, i.e. the eligibility criteria and the mode of calculation, for instance, we talked about the domestic removal allowance, DRA. We have changed the mechanism, and therefore approval by FC is needed. And once approval is given, every year there may be a price adjustments. For instance, the approved EGA might be adjusted according to evaluation by RMVD. So every year we'll make an adjustment according to the mechanism approved by FC, so that there is no need to bother the FC every year or every 5 years. So in conclusion, members are asked to approve when the EGAs should be dispersed, and who are the beneficiaries, and the way of calculation. And Mr. Chen asked what will be the consequence of not approving the paper. Now, if the package is approved today, then with immediate effect, the administration's compensation to squatter households and business undertakings operators will follow the new package. And as said, we are now discussing with households for ongoing developments. I'm not talking about Fanning North or Kutong North. Some households have yet to accept our old arrangements. And upon approval of this paper, we will propose compensation to these households according to the new package. After all, as at the 10th of May, when the new proposals were announced, these households had not accepted the previous arrangements. What about the rough financial implications? Now we have just got a very rough assessment. Now for Kutong North, Fanning North, Hongshekyu, and Guangzhou Phase 1, we have done the freezing surveys. But the information is confined to whether the structure is registered squatters and also the names of the occupants. So the information is very rough. The Lands Department will have to understand from these registered or surveyed squatters and business operators the duration they have stayed there, and understand whether households have to be split. As regards the money required for annual exercises, we will draw money from the Capital Works Reserve Fund. We will inject money into the CWRF, and every year when FC approves a subhead under this head, we will give a clear account to members. Mr. Ao Nok Hin, I expect short questions and short answers, because we need to establish the basic facts. For instance, the number of clearees and number of squatters already demolished. It is said in the paper that there will be dedicated rehousing estates run by the HS. Area 24 of Kutong North, and also another area in Hongshekyu.
So how many units are provided, and what is the area of the units? Chairman, in Fanlang, Hongshekyu, and Kutong North, we set aside a few plots of land for dedicated estates, and the estimate is about 6,000 households. And here there are rental housing, and also similar to HOS, that is a subsidized housing for sale. So you now say that there are 380,000 squatter houses, and you'll be demolishing 8,000. So your 6,000 households cannot accommodate that. So how will you house them? Well, just now, the 8,000 figure quoted, we had made an announcement. If we take the known development items aside from the large projects, we include in Yulong South, Gamtin South, and NT North development. So what we know today, it will affect 8,000 squatter households, but of the 8,000 households, we believe not all of them are eligible for the non-means test for these dedicated estates, because some of them are eligible for the means test to apply for a PRH, and some households have lived there less than 7 years. They will receive a cash ex gratia payment. And so if we rely on previous experience in Area 54 of Tunmun, so if we see how many people have 7 years or 2 years, and we make that assumption, and apply that pattern to the 8,000 households hour estimate regarding the dedicated estates. So 6,000 should be sufficient. I understand. So there will be different circumstances and it is complex. So what I mean is we need to know what the pattern is for the 8,000 households. I am not familiar with the statistics. So how many, where are these located? How many households are in each area? If I heard correctly, you said Fanlang, Gudong, Hongshui, Qiu, Wangzhou. So the 8,000 households come from these 4 areas? Or is there more? Are there more? There are more. I mentioned Gudong, Fanlang North, Hongshui, Qiu, Wangzhou, Phase 1. Allow me to finish my point. So the 8,000 households are from different districts. So we want to talk about on-site settlement or settlement in nearby estates. You might not be able to achieve that under the current policy. So the relocation, can they be housed in the housing society or HA? So you cannot accomplish that, and you say that the 8,000 households are affected. We don't even see where these affected households are from. It's not in the documents. Or do you feel that there's nothing you can do about it? You cannot consider the factor considering the district? Well, where do we reserve dedicated estates? It's in light of the distribution of the squatter houses that we need to demolish. It's in NT East and West. The 8,000 households just in Gudong, Fanlang North, and Hongshui, Qiu. In these 3, we have conducted the freezing survey. So those make up 3,000 plus households. So NT North, this is another new development area, and according to some rough estimates, there are some 3,000 households. So 3,000 plus 3, so another 3,000 is 6,000 plus. And then we have some other PRH construction sites in Tuen Mun, Yuen Long. There are already plans and construction studies. So the 8,000 households are located in NT East and West. So if you want to break it down even further, then we might not be able to provide such detail. It's not cost effective, but we want to be relocate them close to where their squatter housing is located. I have 3 areas of questions. So relaxing the compensation, I think we all agree, because in different meetings we have been seeking this arrangement, but the government is very strange. It does things halfway, or just now Mr. Elohim said that you counted out some 6,000 households that need to be relocated, and when we demolish the squatters, there might be more than one household in the unit. So I'm worried that the dedicated estates is inadequate. Well, that doesn't matter. You need to come up with a backup plan, and you estimate some people will be allocated to a housing authority. So will you have a standardized approach to those assigned to housing authority estates, and will you allow these residents to choose a PRH? There's no advantage. It's a housing society or HA. It's still a public housing. Why there are different queues? Because it's speedy. You are relaxing the policy. You want to resume land. You give them, you vacate them, you compensate them. You are saving time. You shouldn't add to time costs. Why can't you consider that as well? And the money is also an issue. You are ripping people off. The maximum compensation, you claim that it has increased compensation, but it's in fact the goalposts have moved. In 400 square feet, they would receive 600,000. So the ceiling is higher, but in reality, they will only get a higher compensation if their unit is larger. But you are relaxing the scheme, and you don't mind paying a bit more to reduce the controversy, to reduce costs. Then why are you backtracking? I don't understand. And when you accommodate them PRH, you are actually saving money. It doesn't matter how much does a PRH cost. It's more than $1 million. On average, it's $1 million. What about the social cost of people living in people lining up in a queue? So a lot of people would rather take cash. Why can't you apply this line of thinking? I think the bureaucrats are contradicting themselves. They don't have new ideas. Their mentality, they are not working towards maximizing the outcomes. Well, Chairman, the Housing Authority has a means test for PRH, and our non-means test, you cannot have them in the same queue, because the means test of HA is catering to a few 100,000 tenants, but we cannot confuse this or mix up this line. So we have dedicated estates that don't apply the means test. It takes time to build. The Fanlang Patwo Road estate will only be available in 2023 or 2024 in Kutong and Fanlang North, the phase 1. If we develop that, the residents will have to move out by the end of 2019 or beginning of 2020. So if there are a few hundred households there, so HA is cooperating with the government. If the dedicated estates are not built, then HA and Housing Society will be using their rental PRH units to accommodate these eligible non-means test residents. So when the dedicated estates are built, the relevant households can choose the dedicated estates, or they can stay in the HA Housing Society rental units. Mr. Leung Ji-Shang. Regarding the plan, I agree there has been some improvement. Just now, ADG asked about relocation, and the Secretary said that it's not possible. But I don't think it's a relocating of the estate. So we have residents, and they ought to have a different choice, and the government should consider that. So Housing Society has a non-means test. That is a good policy, a virtuous policy. But what if people don't want? Let's say they want to find their own land. They want to rebuild their own house. They want to continue to farm. Why does the Secretary disallow that? Well, I think relocating an estate is unreasonable. How can the government identify land and help you build a village all over again? But if they do it themselves, can't you even issue a record of a squatter record? So I don't agree with the Secretary. If you cannot relax that, then I might. And even DAB might not support this policy. The second question is about compensation. I've read all the documents, and I don't see the AFCD compensation information, including farming, and so is there some supplementary information? So whenever we have the relocation, we don't take a stock count of the agricultural products or the fish stock. You don't disclose this information. This information is never disclosed. And it might only be available when legislators ask. So the affected persons don't receive compensation. So you will go to the subhead and disclose that, and LegCo will grant it in a whole block. So that is not an issue that has been done in the past. But why don't you even have an enclosure or annex regarding compensation? Two questions. Well, I think the first question is, why doesn't the government apply the Lin Hong Yun Wai? That was a whole village. I'm talking about individual villagers who want to rebuild individually. I understand. The idea is to allow the people to find private land, and then the government can allow them to build a house. We'd like legislators to understand that if the development we are proposing is to build larger housing units to meet Hong Kong's housing needs. So when we clear out squatter areas, but if we provide an option where the household can build a low density housing, first of all, that is not a good use of land, and second, I mentioned squatter households. We have always been using a cash ex gratia compensation, and there were means testing. So now we want to provide a more humanistic approach, and I believe we cannot provide a similar housing arrangement. But if they want to maintain the neighborhood relationship, then it is through the dedicated estates of course these are multi-story buildings, but there are some soft measures allowing the villagers to be accommodated in the same estate. So we hope to achieve it through these means. Now, regarding the agricultural compensation, it is not a proposed item, so we have not included in the document. So in the future, we are willing to hear from the farmers to see if we can do a better job. Well, the compensation information is actually available, but it has never been disclosed. So could the Secretary make it available? Yes, Chairman, definitely. Mr. Jiang Chongtai. I will ask a few rounds. In the first round, I'll deal with principles. Well, I feel that this is not an improvement. You can only say it is a coordinated approach for compensation in lieu of development. The affected residents or villagers in the past, they were treated unfairly, and now we just have a uniform system. But behind this uniform system, the first observation I have is the implementation of policy is not just affecting 古洞、粉嶺、洪水橋、元朗. All squatter residents are affected in Hong Kong. So the first thing I want to know is, in May, the government suddenly, they held a press conference and there was no indication from the media that the government had this thinking. And I recall there was an oral questioning. Mr. Layuka asked some relevant arrangements. That was on 10th of January 2018, the council meeting on Wednesday. So, the compensation of residents affected by government development, and at the time the government did not disclose that they had this plan. But in 3-4 months, all of a sudden, in May, they announced this policy. So whether it's a squatter resident, non-indigenous resident, or indigenous residents, or even operators, I want to ask, in the 3-4 months, what happened? Why did the government suddenly take this approach to implement this standardized approach? Even the establishment would like to know why all of a sudden this erupted. And did you consult? Did you consult at least the village representatives? And second, it involves the whole of Hong Kong, all the squatter residents and non-indigenous residents. So I want to ask, according to the Secretary's response, yes, the formula and the people affected are different. The approach is different. Well, but then if you want to emphasize the rationality of the procedure, then I want to ask in reverse, if the FC, just now Mr. Chan mentioned that if we cannot have an option that allows the residents to identify land,
build their own houses, then the DAB may object to your proposal. Now if the FC should object, then going forward for Kudong North, Fanning North, and Hung Shui Kiu NDA, the present compensation package, I think, do you have any contingency plan if they were rejected? Are you going to stick to this proposal, and if you don't like it, then you simply withdraw it? Chairman, first of all, the present proposal does not just appear suddenly. Over the last few years, when we work on Fanning North, Kudong North, and our communication with the residents resulted in very strong views. They told us that we should offer them a non-means tested, rehousing offer. And also they would like the government to make a relaxation in respect of the EGA offers. The government has actually responded to these aspirations. We've considered them very carefully and then put forward the proposal. So they do not suddenly, appear out of nowhere. As to why we did not have a preliminary consultation to inform the residents, because whenever we talk about EGAs and compensation arising from clearance, we were not informed the affected clearees beforehand, because it may be unfair, and some people may seize the opportunity to disseminate false information. So we've heard the residents earlier, and we made an announcement on the 10th of May, but we still need the FC to give us the approval first. Permanent Secretary, could you also answer the question? Let's say if all of us object, are you going to stick to the old plan? If indeed we do not have approval by this committee, then all we can do is to stick to the EGA, package that we've been adopting for many years. If members would like us to reconsider the present proposal, well, honestly, the whole proposal, I think, honestly, our colleagues have put in a lot of efforts to come up with this proposal. We hope we'll be able to respond to the reasonable aspirations of the residents. But we always remember that we must always strike the right balance. In order to please each and every squatter resident so that they will leave the area, then we may be offering an over-generous package. And this may actually, the other residents may not agree. And secondly, we need to be vigilant. That is, sometimes the best intention on our part may actually result in speculation of squatter units, or illegal elements may use this as a means to sell or to trade in squatter units. So we want to strike a right balance. On the one hand, we can take care of those people who have the need, while at the same time we should be able to convince the community that this is the right thing to do. Switch away. In the area to be cleared for the eligible residents who will be entitled to rehousing without having going through the means test. Now, the area to be cleared will not just be located in the NT, it could also be in the urban areas and the development areas, covered by the URA. Let's say under the urban renewal projects undertaken by the URA, can you apply this same concept? And secondly, for the rental units, to be offered by the housing society on a non-means tested basis, in Hong Shui Kiu, there will be supply of such units. But in the other districts, do we have to wait until the housing society has a supply of such units before you can, resettle these residents who don't have to go through the means test? Thirdly, when the housing authority still has the, squatter unit, there was the idea or concept that the affected clearance can opt for, public housing, PRH units subject to a means test, or they could opt to buy an HUS unit using the green form applications. So under your policy, do you have this option? Let's say the affected clearance don't want the cash compensation, and they think that they don't like to be offered a PRH unit. Would you allow them to apply for, a subsidized flat, and apply using the green forms? So your policy apparently is targeting the squatter, residents. But in these NDAs, other than squatter residents, there could be, bona fide owners of small houses, and they may also have tenants. I understand that if they were owners, they will be entitled to the compensation. But what happened to the tenants living in these village houses? Will you have a similar arrangement to take care of them? Now, first of all, the dedicated housing estate will be used to resettle the squatter tenants. But for squatter units which don't have the titles, if we offer them, entitlement, if we offer them resettlement in the dedicated units, then it would be for the legitimate tenants. Can we also apply the same concept and give them a similar offer? For example, for the legitimate tenants affected by the URA projects, and also in the development areas in the new territories, there could be legitimate village houses in which there are legitimate tenants. We hope also to apply the concept of dedicated housing estates. Now, this proposal has the support of our society and this council, and that we should, proceed with this option of dedicated housing units. Then, other than squatter, units for those affected by UA clearance projects, we are prepared to consider offering a similar, option. Mr. Wichiwai asked about the dedicated housing estates. That is, other than offering, a rental unit. Now, if the squatter tenants would like to purchase subsidized, housing, can they do that? Now, the dedicated housing estate that we now propose, within these estates, we will provide sufficient units, sufficient number of such units, and sell them, to the affected tenants, at prices similar to the HOS. In other words, we'll give them, a subsidy to buy the, subsidized, housing units. Because if they offer them a green application form, they will have to compete with other applicants. So our offer is even more direct. Thirdly, for the dedicated housing estates, the first one is to build in Park Wall Road in Fanning. Before that, the Housing Society and the Housing Authority will offer their own PRH units for the tenants to live in first, and subsequently they can have a choice to continue to stay in these units, or they can opt for the units in Hong Shui Kiu and Wang Chau Phase 1. Because the dedicated, housing estates will not be completed so soon, so during the interim period, we will take care of them by offering PRH units. Chairman, the DP, first of all, would like to thank the Development Bureau, especially the Permanent Secretary, for willing to listen to public opinion to improve on the compensation arrangements. Over the years, in North District, we have been liaising with the affected villagers and kaifongs, and many of them said, although the present proposal is not the best arrangement, but still it is a major relaxation, so that many people who originally were not entitled for rehousing are now entitled. For the villagers, they are really very pleased. Secondly, the Permanent Secretary said that some of the villagers who have been forcibly evicted from the villages, during the survey they were covered, but now that they have already been evicted, how are we going to take care of them? The government said that they will review these cases. The Permanent Secretary said just now that she would need to check whether when these tenants were evicted by the original landlord, did they get any compensation? And if so, they will not get any further compensation. I think the Permanent Secretary will need to look at this carefully. I don't think you should adopt a very stringent approach, because sometimes the villagers are really very vulnerable. If they refuse to leave, they don't get anything at all, and the landlord will say, "I'll give you a 1 month, rent, as compensation, 1 or 2 months rental as compensation." If that's the case, they will only get a very minimal compensation. So in that case, I think if they lose their eligibility for rehousing in PRH units because they didn't know there was this arrangement earlier, so this would not be fair. So I hope the PS will come back and really come up with a lenient, approach, arrangement to help these villagers, because they are really the vulnerable group and they don't have a lot of means. And secondly, Permanent Secretary, when we met earlier, I told you that the Martial Long, business, association told you that the present package apparently is making a relaxation in respect of the compensation for the business undertakings. But they told us that the Macho Long Business Association, there are several dozen business operators there, and they told me that in the 1980s they were asked to move from Sangshui to the Macho Long site. And since they need to erect the infrastructures, laying the water mains and so on, in 1983 or 1984, only in 1984 were they able to complete the erection of the facilities to start the operations. During the survey in 1983, the structures were not yet erected. So many of these business operators, according to your present criteria, will not be eligible under your present proposal. So what they want is that, first of all, they would like to meet with the officials of your bureau again, and secondly, they hope that you understand the exceptional circumstances, because we're only talking about 20, 30, business proprietors there. If you could take care of the needs and take care of the compensation, and also they would like to be able to find an alternative site to continue with business operations. They've tried to contact your departments, but very often if they could locate a site, you would tell them that there are all kinds of constraints, and as a result, they're not able to relocate the plants or factories or undertakings. So I hope the Permanent Secretary will consider this, so that be it the villagers and the business undertakings, they would all get a reasonable compensation and rehousing. Chairman, what our paper proposes is about the EGA system. The member was referring to certain specific cases. For example, the compassionate, treatment of tenants who have already been cleared. Since we're talking about a compassionate arrangement, I hope that when the Lands Department, execute these arrangements, they will adopt a compassionate, lenient, and reasonable approach. As for the business undertakings, I think we will need to look at each case, even though some of them were not covered in the 1982 survey, but if they hold certain licenses, then we could actually trace the records. We would, whenever we can, we will try our best to help these, business undertakings. The new GA that we're now proposing would cover those operating in open air. If there are some factory owners who have an open air section, so would we be able to help them? We will certainly, do our best to help those affected in each of these cases. Mr. Hong Chun Yu. Thank you. During the Choi Yun village estate, we encountered one problem. That is, the government had to clear the site which they have lived for a long time, but you did not resettle them properly, and you adopted a high-handed approach and asked them to leave. Of course, according to the ordinance, the government had every right to clear the villagers, and then you came up with an exceptional arrangement in 2009. That was when Donald Tsang was the CE. He adopted an exceptional approach, and then the government offered the EGA. For the present proposal, I think it is a belated offer, because you're going to clear people's land. You should have come up with a proper resettlement package beforehand. The question is not whether the offer is generous or not, but rather whether it's reasonable. You want to clear the area, you have to arrange for these people to be resettled. And so my question is, first of all, why you should charge them, the category B rent, which is more expensive. So let's say these squatter structures have been surveyed in 1982. The people have lived there for a long time. Many of them are already elderly. There are many such cases where when I went to the area, many of these tenants don't have stable incomes. They've lived there for a long time, but you're now clearing them, and they can't even afford to pay the rent of the units you offer to them. So you say you are prepared to come up with special arrangements. Can you give them the option? And secondly, I think this is only a halfway measure. The early offer was $600,000, but how much? What can you do with $600,000 now? I think you need to change with the times. Even civil servant salaries have to be adjusted according to inflation. So perhaps so I'd like to ask whether you need to adjust the amount as well. I'm also concerned about Guangzhou. I've not heard when the government is going to clear Guangzhou. We don't. So very often the government will suddenly come up with a plan and ask people to leave, quickly. And this will inevitably result in conflict. So when are you going to clear Guangzhou? Let me first answer the question regarding Guangzhou. According to the TH Bureau, we're going to build a public housing estate in Guangzhou, and they hope that at the end of this year they'll come to this council to apply for funding. Once the funding is approved, the Lands Department will then talk to the tenants and the business operators to arrange for them to leave. But we still need to wait for the approval for the block allocation before we can confirm everything. And the member said that for the dedicated housing estates we charge category B rental, and that's not right. Now, for the housing society flats, they also charge category type B rents. For these estates, there is a means test requirement. But now we're offering a non-means tested, offer for these people to live in these estates, charging them type B rental. We believe is reasonable.
So, if the household cannot afford the rent, it may be for various reasons. Perhaps he has financial difficulties. If so, then he can opt for HA's PRH on a means-tested basis. And you may say, what about a household stuck in the middle with asset or affordability exceeding that of the HA? And although for the dedicated housing estates of HS is just less than half of the market value, and he still cannot afford it, then a housing society is still willing to provide rent assistance to its tenants. So they will deal with such scenarios using their own mechanism. We've met for 2 meetings. We will suspend the meeting for 5 minutes.